Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the greatest threats facing humanity's future. But here's the thing. The biggest danger might not be what you think. This is a story about the massive challenges out there, but more importantly, it's about the hidden challenges right inside our own heads. All right, let's kick things off with a really powerful thought experiment from the philosopher Derek Parfit. Think about a disaster that wipes out 99% of all people. I mean, that's just unimaginably horrific, right? Billions of lives lost. But a disaster that kills 100% of us, that's not just 1% worse. It's infinitely worse. Because while that first disaster ruins our present, the second one completely demolishes our future. It erases every person who would have ever lived, every piece of art that would have been created, every discovery yet to be made. Everything. Gone. And that difference, that's what makes existential risks a completely different kind of threat. They're not just bigger disasters. They're in a category all their own. Which brings us to the big mystery we're going to unpack today. If the potential loss is that total, why do we find it so incredibly hard to get our act together and prevent it? To really get a handle on that puzzle, we first need to get a clear picture of the stakes. So let's take a look at the precipice we're all standing on and really appreciate what we're up against.
The key phrase here, you've probably guessed, is the entire future. We're not just talking about some awful disaster that set civilization back a few centuries. We are talking about the end of the story, the final page, the permanent, irreversible loss of everything humanity is and everything we ever could have hoped to become.
So where do these ultimate threats even come from? Well, it's a pretty sobering list, a real catalog of potential catastrophes. The sources are vast, and they are coming at us from pretty much everywhere. First, you've got the natural threats on a truly cosmic scale. I mean, we all know what happened to the dinosaurs. An asteroid like that hitting us today wouldn't just be a big explosion. It could throw so much dust into the atmosphere that it would trigger an impact winter, literally blocking out the sun and collapsing agriculture worldwide. Or picture a massive solar flare. An event like the one that happened back in 1859 would, in our super-connected world, just fry our power grids and satellites, basically plunging us back into the dark ages in minutes. Then you have the threats from the natural world, right here on our own planet. You know, COVID-19 gave all of us a pretty stark reminder of how vulnerable we are to pandemics. But imagine a virus that's as contagious as the measles, but as deadly as Ebola. That could happen naturally. And in our globalized world, it could be everywhere before we even knew it hit us. And alongside that is the slow-motion crisis of ecosystem collapse, the gradual breakdown of the very air, water, and soil we need to survive. And this is the big one, the threats we've made ourselves. For decades, we've lived with the nightmare of nuclear war, just a button press away from a global winter. But now, we're inventing entirely new ways to risk it all. Technologies like advanced AI or something called atomically precise manufacturing, they hold incredible promise for sure, but they also open up totally unprecedented dangers if they're misused or if they just get out of our control.
Look, the point is, this isn't some far-off science fiction problem. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has this thing called the Doomsday Clock. They've been tracking these threats since 1947. Right now, it is set to 89 seconds to midnight. Let me just repeat that. That is the closest it has ever been to global catastrophe.
So, with all these dangers piling up, you'd think we'd be in a full-blown worldwide panic to fix things, right? Well, here's the twist. The biggest reason we struggle to act isn't actually out there. It's in here, in the fundamental wiring of our own brains. Our brains are absolutely incredible, but they have to take shortcuts to process everything. These are called heuristics. And these shortcuts worked great for our ancestors trying to survive on the savannah. But today, in our complex, high-tech world, these once helpful features can act like dangerous bugs in our mental software. So, let's get into it. What are these specific mental glitches that make us so uniquely bad at seeing and then acting on these massive, long-term threats? It's really fascinating stuff. First up is something called the availability heuristic. And the idea is pretty simple. If you can think of an example of something really easily, your brain assumes it must be common or very likely to happen. We basically confuse how vivid a memory is with how probable an event actually is. And this comparison just lays out the problem perfectly. We're way more likely to be afraid of a recent pandemic or a really gruesome disease like Ebola because they're vivid, they're emotional, and they're plastered all over the news. They're highly available in our minds. But a slow, grinding threat like ecosystem collapse, or a super abstract one like a misaligned AI,
Well, those don't create the same scary mental pictures, so our brain just naturally downgrades how important they are. All right, the next glitch is one that messes with our sense of time. It's called hyperbolic discounting, and it just means we are hardwired to care way more about right now than about the future.
This little study says it all, doesn't it? When we think about our future self, oh, that person is a saint. That person eats fruit and is healthy, but our present self? Nope. Our present self wants the chocolate and wants it right now. We discount that future reward of being healthy for the immediate pleasure of chocolate.
Okay, now just scale that up from a chocolate bar to the entire planet. This exact same bias makes it incredibly hard for us as a society to make big sacrifices today, like, say, overhauling our entire energy system to prevent a catastrophe that feels like it's decades away. The immediate chocolate bar of economic convenience just keeps winning out over the long-term fruit of a stable planet.
And finally, there's a really powerful bias that messes with the information we're even willing to look at in the first place. You've probably heard of it, confirmation bias. Put simply, our brains just do not like to be wrong, so we tend to seek out and remember information that proves we were right all along.
This bias traps us in these self-reinforcing echo chambers. Instead of changing our minds when we see new evidence, we just filter the world to fit what we already believe. It means we're not just ignorant of critical warnings, we actually become resistant to them, because accepting them would mean admitting we were wrong. And when the topic is the future of civilization, that's a mistake we just can't afford to keep making.
So, if our own minds are working against us, pushing us to ignore the biggest threats out there, what in the world can we do about it? This might be the single biggest challenge of what you could call planetary stewardship.
The key takeaway is that awareness is absolutely the first step, but it can't be the last. There's a concept called the G.I. Joe fallacy from that old cartoon that ended with knowing is half the battle. Well, it turns out, with cognitive biases, knowing is not half the battle. Just being aware of them isn't enough to magically fix them. We have to build systems, institutions, and new ways of thinking that actively counteract our flawed instincts.
And the good news is that work has already started. There's this growing community of researchers and organizations dedicated to doing exactly that, studying these long-term risks, coming up with safeguards, and pushing for the kind of future-focused thinking our brains just don't do naturally. They're trying to build the cognitive guardrails our civilization needs to survive.
And that leaves us with this ultimate paradox. We are trying to steer a 21st century global civilization, with all its incredible technology and complexity, using minds that evolved for life on the savannah. Our success in navigating the unprecedented dangers we've created will come down to whether we can understand our own mental limitations and then consciously build a world that compensates for them. The answer to that question? Well, it will determine the entire future of humanity itself.